I think this is such a startling image. It's a piece that really piques your curiosity right away. It's got a lot of strange and unusual imagery, and it's the type of piece that you really want to spend time with. You really want to think about it. You want to know what's going on. It seems like there's a very specific narrative, and I like that about this piece, that I really want to figure out what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, I like that there's a few different elements that you can kind of focus on, and that they also really take advantage of the full breadth of the paper, that everything sort of reaches to the edge and every element is considered.
For me, this curiosity really stems from the two figures in the image. I'm so curious as to what their relationship is, because there's so much tension, I feel like, and that really adds to the concept of the piece. Like, why is there so much tension in this piece?
And not just tension, but I also think mood. I think the mood of the piece is very stark. It's very dramatic. I mean, you really feel like there's something wrong going on in the piece. Like, there's definitely a lot of conflict going on between these two figures. So I'm kind of wondering what you guys think the relationship is between the two figures as depicted in the image.
It's interesting because it's definitely, I think there's some ambiguity there that's intentional, but I'm also a little bit confused about that, actually.
I find that the figure on the left seems to be a bit more vulnerable, and the figure on the right perhaps has a little bit more power, mostly because of the stances. I feel like the figure on the left has their arms crossed across the body, which seems like a defensive move. The other figure is holding a heart in a very aggressive, forceful manner, which I think speaks to what kind of their power dynamic is. Yeah,
I think the sort of body language and the acting, if you want to use that word in that regard, is really strong in terms of the figures, and I think that in that way that power dynamic reads. But I'm also a little confused about the way that the heart at the center of the canvas interacts with those figures and what that sort of symbolizes. Because it does feel like, you know, there's these sort of veins going into the one figure's arm, or going into both figures' arms, but there's more going into the sort of more antagonistic figure, so it seems like kind of a mixed message.
Well, it's interesting that the heart really is the one subject in the image that does physically connect the two figures, because the two figures never touch each other. It's the heart in the middle that then latches itself onto the two figures. And I know we were reading in the artist statement that this piece really was about this relationship and this person feeling very controlled by another person. And I definitely can see that the figure on the left is definitely the one who is not in control. But I guess I feel like the heart in the middle is attacking both of them. And it seems like maybe the more controlling figure should be using the heart as a weapon against the other one, that maybe the heart should be much more aggressive. Because I look at the veins on the figure on the left, and the veins, they're so small and minuscule. It seems like the veins should almost be strangling that figure. Like it should really feel trapped in a way. Like I'm not convinced that the figure on the left would have difficulty leaving. It seems like they could just rip the veins off and walk away. And it sounds from the statement that it was a much more intense situation than that.
The body language of that figure doesn't match the way that the heart is interacting with it. Like, it feels like they're being tangled up based on this sort of defensive position.
I think it's a very complicated relationship that the artist is trying to portray. And I really admire that they're taking on, first of all, such a personal subject. I think it's really difficult to take on something that's so emotionally close to you and to put it out there for people to see. So I think that's really brave of the artist to do that. On the other hand, I do feel that this is a piece that needs that verbal explanation to compensate for some of the ambiguities in the piece. I think in terms of color, I would reconsider the black and white palette with the splash of red in the middle. Because first of all, I feel like that's the cliche, is the black and white image with a splash of red somewhere. I mean, I've seen that in so many movies and artworks and everything. And I think maybe one way to fix that would be to sneak in some dark velvety purples into the black areas. Because I get the sense, looking at the acrylic painting technique, that the black was black right out of the tube. And I think if you take black and you make your own black instead of doing black out of the tube, you actually get a richer, more intense black. Like, my favorite two combinations of dark black is to mix alizarin crimson and viridian. And what you end up with is a deep, dark purple that looks black, but has a little bit more of a vibrant sensation to it.
And I think you could also pull some of those purples out maybe and reflect it kind of in the heart or something to kind of move that color around.
Yeah. I see this lighting situation that's very strong and very high contrast. And with not like, there's a strong light source, but not a lot of light. And I think immediately of Caravaggio, but it's also like really hard to find like good reproductions of Caravaggio that convey that richness of the darks.
Well, you know what I think kind of shocked me when I saw my very first Caravaggio painting in person was I'd seen all his work in textbooks. And I just always assumed they were just flat black backgrounds.
Yeah.
But when I saw it in person, I started seeing all these things that just aren't in the textbooks. You're like, I had no idea there was a rock in that lower left-hand corner.
Right.
I had no idea there was a window over there. I even think that the intensity of the red and the heart, it's a little too pinkish to me. Like, I feel like it should be, to me, it seems like there was a lot of cadmium red used, like more of an alizarin crimson, I think would be better. Something that just seems more sinister. Like, I just sort of feel like the heart is this like bubblegum pinky red color.
Yeah.
And the heart just seems like to be the real hidden antagonist in the piece.
Right.
And I think that through color, you could really show that.
Definitely do some research on what an actual heart really looks like, because I sort of feel like this is a heart that was just drawn out of someone's head. And I feel like if you went and you looked at pictures of what real hearts look like, you could see the patterns of the veins, you could get the shapes of all the different components of it. I just feel like the heart, I don't know, it looks like a rubber ball to me or something. Like it just doesn't have the gravity that I'm craving.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's satisfying with this piece is that it's definitely a sort of more symbolist piece. Like it's working on an element of sort of like metaphor, but all those elements are rendered in a pretty naturalistic, realistic way. Like the bird face, we can see all the feathers, and it looks like a real bird. It's not a cartoon bird.
I'm not sure I totally understand why they have to be birds. I mean, I don't think that they should necessarily be people, because I definitely think the bird head makes it a very surrealistic, dreamlike image.
I really enjoy
just don't really know why a bird. Like, why not some other animal? Like, why?
Yeah, I mean, I think of like a bird being in a cage or like being free
that's
and
a good
flying,
point.
and that's a sort of interesting kind of tension. Like, it's just the idea of freedom versus being entrapped. But I mean, it could also be like a totally personal kind of symbolism, and I think that's perfectly fine. But I think with that sort of stuff, I want you to really, I think one really has to like consider exactly what that sort of personal symbolism is and what it means to you, and to really have it fully considered. Because it is like kind of confusing me that in the artist statement, they say that there's a mask, and I'm not sure if the figure that's sort of hunched up is wearing a bird mask, or if that's a real bird head, if it's some sort of anthropomorphic bird, and that the other one is wearing a mask.
I mean, I didn't read them as masks at all.
Yeah.
I really thought it was just an actual real bird, and then that had a human's body. I mean, I read it as one continuous real live being.
Totally, yeah.
And I think if you want it to look like a mask, you have to show the cutout or a string or just something that indicates that. I mean, personally, I like it better as not a mask, because I feel like it's a lot more mysterious. I feel like if it was, I feel like masks, again, like the black and white and red, it's such a cliche. It's like people use masks all the time. And so I like it better as not being a mask. So that's one thing to think about.
I'm also curious, though, why is it just the bird's head and not the rest of the body or other parts of the body? Like, if you're thinking of being trapped in a cage, I feel like wings are really important in that kind of concept, so why human arms and a bird head?
Well, I mean, you're talking about wings. I'm wondering, because one thing they do with birds to keep them from escaping is they clip their wings. And so maybe that's another image that they can insert to talk about that, being trapped and not being able to leave for a very particular reason. I mean, I think it's a really powerful piece. I think it's a really ambitious image. I think it's hard to make images that are this complicated, because I think a lot of people worry, oh, no one's going to understand what it means, or maybe that's too much work or something. And so even though I think we have a lot of questions about why this decision and this doesn't make sense, or we feel this is too ambiguous, I really appreciate what this person put into this piece. It feels like a very emotional piece that has a lot of gravity to it.
Having people ask questions is good because you want that mystery, especially with this piece.
And I think what I see is sometimes when I go to a gallery and I see an artwork that's very literal, like I say, oh, it's a bird. Right, it's a bird. I'm done. I don't need to think about anything else.
Yeah.
And this is a piece where I start thinking, well, maybe it's a bird, but maybe it's a person. But then why is the heart here? Why is that there? And so even though we're asking all these questions, I think that's a good thing because it means we're really engaging with the piece and it's getting us to think. You got to do clap.
Better.